Hello, and welcome to All Hands on Tech. Today's episode is actually borrowed from the Developer Weekly podcast. Pluralsight author Azure Barry recently launched this podcast, and he surfaced this specific episode as one that All Hands on Tech listeners would enjoy. In this episode, Barry speaks with developer Scott Hanselman about teaching, the importance of humor in learning, and much, much more. We'll include links in the show notes to subscribe to the Developer Weekly podcast if you haven't already. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Barry to introduce Scott.
This week, I'm talking with Scott Hanselman about learning and teaching. Scott is a web developer who has been blogging at hanselman.com for over a decade. He works in open source on ASP.NET and the Azure Cloud for Microsoft out of his home office in Portland, Oregon. Scott has 3 podcasts, including the Hanselman Minute podcast, is an international speaker, hosts the Azure Friday show, has an incredible YouTube channel, and he's written a number of books and spoken in person to almost 500,000 developers worldwide, which is probably more by now. Thanks for being on the show, Scott.
Hey, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Still COVID Corona time here. So as we are nearing Christmas time here in the Netherlands as well, we are kind of locking down a bit more because, it's starting to get cold. People are inside, so we have more infections. But compared to other countries, we're doing okay, I think. But still, this time just sucks. Mm-hmm. This year sucks, and I couldn't wait to get it over with.
Yeah, well, it was March. Yesterday was March, and today is December. And all of this just needs to be done as soon as possible.
Yeah, and then hopefully, time will return to normal in 2021. And, we'll all have a vaccine and puppies and rainbows and unicorns. Who knows?
Let's just make it so I can go out and have dinner and that everyone's healthy and safe. And then I can go to the movies. And, the first, I think when I'm in a movie, then a movie theater, then I'll feel normal. So talk to me in a year.
Yeah, I hope so. All right. So, today I want to talk to you about learning and teaching because you do so many things. Like I just mentioned when I introduced you. You teach on YouTube, you talk, you write books, you do lots and lots of stuff. And, people know you from the interwebs, basically, where they see you on Twitter and everything. And most of those things involve some sort of teaching, right? So how did you first get into teaching?
I think that the teachers that I had when I was younger, I think of my 5th and 6th grade teachers, so that would be age 11 and 12, were so enthusiastic. They were so excited about teaching that you just couldn't help to be excited yourself. And when you have someone who is so enthusiastic about a topic, it's easy to become enthusiastic on your own. So I think of a teacher as being kind of a professional enthusiast. And if you like have a topic and you're like, oh, have you heard, Barry? Did you know this thing is so cool? Let me show you. Hang on. Let me share my screen. That's a teacher, right? So a teacher is just someone that does that at scale.
Okay. And then you got into it because you also taught at university, right?
Well, so I would give talks and I did not user groups. What were they called? Clubs, like school clubs, right? So I learned chess, and then I'm like, oh, I should start a chess club at school. So 6th grade, I started a chess club. Now I'm not a teacher at this point. I'm a 12-year-old, but starting a club is a way to share your enthusiasm. And if you don't have anyone who knows how to play chess, then you have to teach them chess. And the next thing you know, you're a 6th grader teaching other 6th graders chess, or whatever club you're in, whatever thing you're excited about. And then you keep doing that. And then later on, you discover user groups where we would sit around and play with a Commodore 64 computer. And that was a kind of teaching as well. And then you go and give a small topic discussion, or you talk for 20 minutes on a particular topic at a user group. And the next thing you know, you're teaching at a university, course. Teach for an hour, and then next thing you know, you're teaching for an hour a week. And then next thing you know, you're teaching 3 classes a term or something like that.
Yeah. And teaching is very cool because, like you say, you can share your knowledge, but then at scale, which I think is very valuable and works very well nowadays with the internet, of course. But let's go back to when you then would present at user groups and do a talk, let's say. Where did you even learn how to do that? Learn how to get on stage and actually present something? Because I remember when I started doing it, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just winging it. Was it the same for you?
When I was 13 or 14, maybe 15, freshman year. Freshman year is our first year of high school. So this is like 4 years before graduation. I did plays, and then I would do talent shows and stand-up comedy. And then we had an a cappella group. So then like singing without a backing band. There's not much different from doing a play than there is doing a one-man show or one-woman show with PowerPoint behind you. It's a pretty easy jump. I mean, if you're on stage giving a talk at a conference versus you are putting together hours of content every week because you're a teacher, the only difference is the one stage is elevated. I think teachers basically are putting on a conference every week.
Right, yeah. And then that just requires a lot more preparation.
Sometimes the teacher knows the topic so much that they could teach 10 weeks on the course. I'm sure you've had teachers that are like invented a thing or they were so good at a thing. Like I could probably sit down and you could probably do the same. Like you could do a 40-hour class on Azure with maybe a couple hours prep, right? You could just say, okay, if someone called you and said, quick, Barry, do a workshop. I need 9 to 5 for 5 days. You'd be like, give me a half day to prepare. And then you'd be all set. I could do that on .NET, on Azure, or on ASP.NET. So I'm sure that my biology teacher from school could easily do 40 hours of biology, which spread out over a semester or a term can be like 9 weeks or whatever. But then other teachers are learning topics where they're just one chapter ahead of you in the book. Like being a teacher doesn't mean being an expert. It sometimes just means being able to break things down and come up with a better analogy than you can quicker.
Yeah, so being
doesn't mean you're able.
So being able to explain, let's say, complex topics in an understandable manner.
Yeah, like honestly, my whole thing is analogies. Like if there's one thing I can do well in the last 30 years is, so it's like da 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 da, and like, oh yeah, coming up with analogies at speed is the only skill that I have.
Yeah, well, it works well. I hear that a lot on your podcast as well, where you then say it back what the person spoke about.
Isn't that awful? I've done so many.
It's okay.
I've done so many episodes. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's all I do now is listen to people and go, so what I'm hearing you say, Barry, is that the Azure's like a raccoon. And you're like, where is he going with this? Makes no sense at all.
Yeah, no, but it works well, and it helps people also to see the topic from a different angle, which helps them to learn better. At least I find that. So that is then part of your teaching style, right? Having analogies. What other things are part of your teaching style? Because I sometimes see you being very enthusiastic and let's say on stage, and sometimes I see you being a bit more quiet. Let's say on YouTube.
So there's a couple. That's a great thing that you've noticed. So there's two things to consider there. There's the medium, and then there's the audience. You think about an interview with Tom Cruise is different than Tom Cruise on screen is different than Tom Cruise jumping out of an airplane, right? I'm not saying I'm Tom Cruise. I'm just pointing out that context and medium are different.
You're creating an analogy again. Yeah.
Funny how I did that. So I'm still Scott. I'm not playing a role. I'm not faking anything. But when the kids are asleep on a Friday night and I'm up at midnight in a dark room trying to be welcoming to new people in tech, that's not the time to be on. Like you use the word on, where it's like, hey, welcome everybody. We're going to talk to you about computer stuff they didn't teach you. Blah, blah, blah. Like that's not going to make someone welcoming. Yeah. And that's not the right time. But if you're at a festival in I don't know, in Holland, and it's like, yes, it's .NET Fest, and we're on stage, and everyone's excited, and there's balloons, then you're on, right?
Yeah.
So being able to do that though intentionally is very different than just having it happen. Some people just let that happen and they don't know why. Other people intentionally say, all right, what's the medium? What's the goal? Who's the audience? So I think of myself in that context as a character actor.
Yeah.
I just put on a different pair of pants where that pants are very quiet or they're very loud.
Ah, right. And then your previous experience obviously helps with that, where you also acted on stage. That's basically similar, yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's not there's acting where you're literally trying to be someone that you're not. But, talking quietly to your kids and teaching them something is different than leading a birthday party. And each of those things has value. But, I've been blessed to do things on many different mediums, YouTube, on stage, in books, on a podcast. The fact that you can't see me means that right now I can't really gesticulate with my hands and jump up and down, because it's not going to help move the podcast forward.
No.
But I can change the way that I speak. I can change the meter of my speech. I can try not to say a lot. I can move around on the microphone to try to affect this medium if it helps move the message forward. So being a teacher is being a teacher in context.
Right, yeah. And by the way, I can just hear your hands moving almost. So, I can feel it.
That's simulated. You can feel the hands moving. It's true.
Yeah. So when you're then on stage, you're there to deliver a message, basically, right? Let's say you're doing a keynote or something, which is like an hour-long presentation of something. You're trying to convey a couple of points. How do you construct a story like that?
Well, so you said I'm trying to convey a couple of points. I think that's fair. Like there's quote unquote messaging that one is.
That's my assumption.
Yeah, but I think I'm actually trying to we call it the CTA, or the call to action. I personally don't think about the message. I think about the feeling. So like I'll literally sit down with someone before a podcast and I'll say, how do you want people to feel after this? Should they feel overwhelmed? Like let's say we were going to do a podcast on Kubernetes.
Yeah.
We could decide intentionally, and deliberate practice is so important. We could decide intentionally, we want this person to feel overwhelmed. We're trying to make them afraid of Kubernetes. That could be a goal.
Yeah.
And then we could say, well, after we've beaten them over the head with Kubernetes, then we pick them up and we say, it's okay. I know it's a lot. Let's make them feel good. Let's make them feel empowered. Let's make them feel like, hey, I can do this. Maybe it's not as scary as I thought. Usually I want people to feel empowered. I want very much people to feel I can do this, where this is whatever the topic of the podcast is.
Yeah. Ah, right.
And then I work backwards from that feeling. Like when you put on a play, what do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel depressed? Do you want them to think? Do you want them to have, what's the conversation that you want people to have in the car as they leave the play? Yeah. Now, when you put on a podcast, we have this thing we call driveway moments. Again, this is a bit of an American context, but imagine you're driving to work and then you're driving home. The podcast is so good that you sit in the driveway and you let it finish before you get out of the car.
Yeah.
That's when you know you're doing a good show. So making as many driveway moments as possible is also a goal of a podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So you work your way back from the feeling of a session or a talk or whatever thing that you are creating.
Yeah. Okay. So here's an example. We're doing a podcast. You invited me on your lovely show, and I thank you for that. What do you want people to feel at the end of this show?
Yeah, I want them to feel inspired to go out there and teach, because, at the end we'll have a little CTA, like you say, a call to action, where folks, can learn more about teaching and such. And hopefully then they feel inspired to share what they know. That's what I want to convey. Yeah.
Then let's do it. We'll do it together.
All right. So I think your particular style of teaching is very attractive to many people. We've seen that in how people follow you on Twitter, on YouTube, on all the mediums. What do you think makes your particular style so successful?
I was watching a show recently, and what was the name of the guy? He was in Spider-Man, and he played. Oh shoot,
Toby something?
You might have to. No, not Tobey Maguire. He played the newspaper guy. You may have to
I might Google Bing.
Pause. Edit this for a second. Yeah. Give me 1 second to look this guy up because it's important. J.K. Simmons.
Okay.
J.K. or his, and you'll see his face. He's an American actor, but you'll know immediately. Yeah. And you're gonna go, oh, it's that guy, right? Because he's a character actor. There's not a lot of movies where he's like the star, but he's a lot of movies where he made it better. And he's been Commissioner Gordon in superhero. He's not a superhero, but he's always like he's there also, Yeah. So in Batman, he was Commissioner Gordon, and in Spider-Man, he was J. Jonah Jameson. And you have to ask yourself, like, why is this guy successful? And I think it's two reasons. He's very good at it. He's quietly good at his job, and he's been around forever. So like longevity. You're like, oh, you're that guy from that thing.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like I think I'm decent at my job. I don't think I'm like the best, but I'm quietly consistent for 30 years.
Right. Yeah. You've always showed up on your blog and on your podcast, for instance, every week.
I like that you said that. Showing up, whether it be for community, like tonight I have a user group for my local Portland area user group, for .NET in this case. Simply being present for a long period of time is the way that it's like, oh, how did that person become famous? Like, where'd Brad Pitt come from? Well, he was always there quietly turning the crank for many, many years until he just was always there, right? Like Tom Hanks, another example. Like I know I'm using American actors, but it's like
we all know
consistently kicking butt for years is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. And you're doing a great job at it. But still, there is, I think your style is still very good, because even if you did show up and you were just very bad at it, and at some point, there are people that do that. That wouldn't work, and that wouldn't translate in the success that you have with teaching people. So maybe from my perspective, something that you do very well is what I would like to call an infotainment. So listening to you explain something is not only informative, but also very entertaining.
Sure. Yeah.
You use
I've actually said edutaining. Very similar word, right? Because you're basically entertaining and then providing information or educating. So you're definitely you're as we say in America, you're picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah.
So you got what I was going for. It doesn't have to be boring.
And then do you incorporate humor on purpose in your talks, or do you just come up with that stuff on the fly?
It depends. Like I wouldn't say my YouTubes aren't super funny. My podcasts aren't funny. But if you're, paying money to sit in a room for a conference somewhere and someone spent the money to fly you somewhere, I think when I go to a play and I sit down, or I go to a stand-up comic and I sit down, I want to laugh. So I've always associated the theater with humor. So the theater is where my humor comes out the most. And I think humor makes the education go down better.
No, definitely. Yeah. Because then it's a bit more lighthearted and people are more receptive to, receive whatever it is that you have to tell them.
Exactly.
Okay. So with all that, then what do you like best about teaching? What is the moment within a session or within anything that you see from the audience or something else, or that you get reactions? What is the best part of teaching that you love?
So even if there's 100 people in the room or 1,000, I will start walking around on the stage. I will look left and right, and I will pick 2 people, one off to each side, one off to the left, one off to the right. And I will focus on those people. And then I will look at them, and I'll pick a person who I think is like nodding along or at least appreciating what I'm doing. And if they're nodding, I'm like, oh, that person gets what I'm saying. They're also picking up what I'm putting down. So I'm going to look at that person. Now, they don't feel like I'm actually staring at them, but the people to the left will see me and go, oh, he's looking towards the left. He's looking to us. People around them all feel like they're involved. And it's a very engaging way of kind of heart beating back and forth as you look left and you look right. And I pick one person, but then the entire left side and the entire right side think that I'm looking at them. And then then I can ignore the other 900 people and then just focus on the 2 people that dig what I'm doing.
Right. That makes it also a little bit less maybe overwhelming for yourself.
Oh yeah, I don't want to talk to 1,000 people. It's way easier to just sit with 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Like then a talk becomes tutoring.
Yeah, exactly. So is that then the best part of teaching, that you get to interact with those specific people or with the audience?
It's the moment when somebody's like, oh, like you get when they click and you're like, that person just got it.
Yeah.
That's, like you might talk to them for 10, 15, 20 minutes and you're like, oh man, nobody is getting what I'm saying here. But you get that first laugh and then you get that first moment where it's like, oh, okay, hang on. This, I lost the other 900 people, but these 2 got it.
Yeah.
Now I'm okay. That's enough.
Yeah,
I want to take everyone with me, but it
doesn't always work. And that's a magical part. Yeah, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And then have you ever bombed when folks do stand-up comedy? You bomb when the room is just not laughing and maybe even booing at you. Have you ever had that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's whether, a joke might not land or sometimes a bombing for me will be where something didn't work culturally. A joke or an analogy might not work in Malaysia as it does in Holland, as it does in Russia.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, back when we traveled and I was putting a huge amount of effort into, keynotes and stuff, I would, and I think you and I may have talked about this in some European country at some point, I will go there a day early and I will find a local and I'll run the whole talk by that local, including analogies. Like right now, we didn't prep any of this, so I'm using names like Tom Hanks or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I would find out who's the Tom Hanks of the Netherlands, right? Or who's the Conan O'Brien of Malaysia.
Yeah.
And then I would swap out the analogies for local politicians or local comedians. And in doing that, localize the talk. Again, not linguistically localizing, but culturally localizing. That is a technique that I've been doing now for almost 13 years, and it is very, very helpful. People don't even realize that the difference between a good talk is hey, that was a good talk, and a talk that has just the right amount of oh wow, you actually hung out here in the Dominican Republic for 2 days and thought about who we are as a people and inserted memes that were specific to us, is another way to connect with people.
Right. Yeah, because that's all about being relatable, isn't it? Because when people then get the feeling that you understand who they are, then they can relate to you as well. And you're just one of them. You're also a developer. You understand who they are, so they understand who you are. And therefore you can have that magical moment of teaching.
Yep. And I think being relatable is one way to put it. Another way to think about it, though, is the idea that you're not swooping in from whatever country or place that you're coming from and declaring, I'm here with the knowledge and I'm bringing the knowledge to you. You're saying hey, I'm just a person and I'm just the one on this side of the stage today. It very well could be you tomorrow. You don't ever want to hold court.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I don't think that's a healthy relationship.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you said earlier about being a professionally enthusiastic person instead of, let's say, a teacher that might come across arrogant or condescending.
Right, exactly. Condescending or gatekeeping or any of those things that make you feel like I'm not supposed to be here. The number one thing a teacher or a presenter should do is make you feel like you're supposed to be here, not you should never feel like you've been othered or made to feel like, oh yeah, why are you here? That is the worst.
Yeah, that's definitely the worst. Yeah, and those are also
totally
the talks that then people, once they know that, they will obviously avoid that talk and or that presenter or teacher. So yeah, you do that very well. And then you said also something about learning, where some teachers are obviously not experts in what they teach per se. When I'm creating a Pluralsight course, I'm not always an expert in the topic. For instance, a couple of months ago, I was asked to create a Pluralsight course about quantum computing. Ultimately, it fell through, but I was just doing lots and lots of research about it because, I'm not a quantum computing researcher, not by far.
Mm-hmm.
But what I can do is research the topic and then condense all of that information so that I can create beautiful slides and then actually convey that and teach that to people. Now, what is your process for learning new stuff? So
the term I usually use is synthesize, right? Like I may not be an expert in quantum computing, but given a day, I could put together a 15-minute overview for an audience. Like if I was a technical advisor, or Satya or somebody wanted to know something, I could probably go and do enough research, just like an analyst, maybe kind of a general expert in a space, but not a specialized expert in a space. You're asking, how do I synthesize that? How do I put that together?
Yeah. What's your process for learning new things?
I actually did a Pluralsight course for free. All of my Pluralsight courses are free. I don't get any money on them. And you can see it, I think at the website it's still up, called speakinghacks.com. And in that talk, Rob Connery gives me a topic that I am not familiar with. And he watches me in real time learn the topic and then give a talk on the topic. I think the topic was coffee script.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard. You're sitting down and you're trying to figure out, is this thing like anything I've ever seen before? How can I, what are the appropriate analogies? How does this thing fit into my existing workflow? Basically, whenever you're saying anything, when you're teaching a topic, after every single sentence, a reasonable reaction from the audience is, so what?
Yeah.
Think about that. Like if you answer so what after every single thing you say, then that'll be a good next sentence. So it's like, hey everyone, it's Azure Barry. I'm going to talk about the cloud. So what? Well, the cloud is super interesting, right? The cloud is actually someone else's computer. So what? Well, someone else's computer means it's not yours. So what? And then that so what is like moving you forward.
Yeah.
So if I can answer so what with any of any of my sentences, then I'm definitely pushing the ball forward.
Yeah. Okay. So that is a great way to then learn and create, let's say, a teaching material or content to teach from something that you're learning.
Because if the audience, like God, of course, that would be a horrible audience, right? If the audience was like watching you talk and they were like, Barry, so what? Like that would feel bad.
They might be thinking it.
Exactly. They are thinking it. So just make sure that everything that you answer, make sure your next sentence answers the implied so what.
Yeah. All right. That's great.
Have you ever heard of yes and, the concept of yes and?
Yeah. And obviously you did that when you were on stage, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes and is a great way to move the ball forward when doing improvisation.
Yeah.
So what is the yes and style of for moving conversation forward when you're doing teaching.
Okay. That's actually a very great Pluralsight course. I've seen that as well.
Thanks.
And I think, it's a must-see for people that want to teach or want to be on stage, or it's also just very entertaining to watch. And like you said, it's free, and I'll link to it in the show notes, of course. So as we are coming to the end of this episode, like I said, I want to give the listeners a call to action and a bit of inspiration. Let's say that I'm listening to this podcast and I'm already presenting sometimes in a user group, or maybe I'm thinking about it and I want to get started, but I'm not sure how to get started with actually teaching people, how to develop my own style, what to do with that. What would be your top tip for people that are thinking about teaching or starting teaching, what should they do?
There are things you can do, like find out where there's a thing called Toastmasters, which I think is a global, like I want to learn to speak type of a place. The thing that I think the better answer is be intentional. Go and search for deliberate practice. People think that the Scotts and the Barrys and the whoever's go out there and they just start talking and everything works out great. And then if it doesn't work out well for you, then, I must not have that special something. I don't have that talent. I don't have that whatever.
Yeah.
When in fact, there is a focused, deliberate, conscious practice for presenting information correctly and appropriately at scale. And you can learn that by just doing it. I think a lot of people just aren't willing to actually do the work. Like we had that comment at the very beginning about character actors and how, where did Tom Hanks come from, or where did so-and-so come from? And it's like, well, they were always working. They were doing what's called grinding, meaning they were somewhere in some bad movie sucking or whatever, right? I was presenting at user groups in like 1994 very badly. I did not do well then, and that's cool. That's where you should start. Do a user group, talk. Do a brown bag. Present to 10 people over Zoom at your office, and then literally get their feedback, and then do it again, and then do better, and then do a user group, and then do a code camp, and then do one in your country, and then do one at a conference.
Yeah. So just get started and learn.
You gotta
by doing it. Yeah. All right. That is great. And obviously also visit that Pluralsight course and get some speaking hacks there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for talking to me and taking the time to tell me about teaching and learning today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you for listening to All Hands on Tech. To see show notes and more info, visit pluralsight.com/podcast. To subscribe to the Developer Weekly podcast, visit developerweeklypodcast.com.